Did you know that the US economy shrank in the first 2 quarters of this year, narrowly avoiding an official recession? As we delve into the details of the economic landscape, it's clear that this contraction was a slight one, with unemployment rates staying low. It's like we've been walking on a tightrope, managing to keep our balance despite the strong winds of economic uncertainty. The third quarter, however, brought a sigh of relief, with the economy showing signs of growth. But before we start celebrating, let's not forget that the shadow of a potential financial crisis is still looming over us. It's like a storm cloud on the horizon. We can see it, and even though the sun is still shining, we know it's only a matter of time before the storm hits. Now you might be wondering, what does this mean for me? Well, let's take a look at the stock market. Major companies, the ones that are household names, have already started feeling the impact. Tesla, the electric vehicle and clean energy giant Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook, and Amazon, the e-commerce behemoth, have all seen their stocks take a hit. But why is this happening? Well, it's a bit like a domino effect. Decreased consumer demand leads to businesses cutting back on investments and laying off employees, which in turn leads to even lower demand. It's a vicious cycle, one that could potentially trigger an economic downturn. So what's next? Economists and financial analysts are projecting varying probabilities of a financial crisis. They're focusing on the nature of the crisis and the behavior of inflation. With this in mind, they've outlined 3 main scenarios we could be facing, and spoiler alert, none of them are particularly comforting. We'll be delving deeper into these scenarios in the next part of our discussion. But for now, let's remember that while we've managed to avoid an official recession so far, the potential for a financial crisis is very real. Major companies like Tesla, Meta, and Amazon have already felt the impacts on the stock market. And if they're feeling the pinch, it's only a matter of time before the rest of us do too. Economists and financial analysts are predicting a varying probability of a financial crisis. These experts are looking at different indicators and factors to understand the likelihood of a downturn. One key trigger that's being closely monitored is the consumer demand. Now, consumer demand plays a pivotal role in any economy. It's the fuel that keeps the wheel of commerce spinning. If people are buying, businesses are selling, and the economy is humming along nicely. But when consumer demand decreases, that's when things start to get a bit shaky. Imagine you're running a business. If customers stop buying your products or services, you have a problem. You might try to stimulate demand by cutting prices, but if that doesn't work, you'll likely have to start making some tough decisions. You might have to cut back on investments, or worse, start laying off employees. It's a tough situation, but it's one that businesses across the country could face if consumer demand decreases significantly. And that's not all. When businesses start to cut back, it can lead to a vicious cycle of economic decline. You see, when people lose their jobs, they have less money to spend. This can lead to even lower consumer demand, which can force businesses to cut back even more. It's a cycle that can quickly spiral out of control, leading to a full-blown economic downturn. So while the third quarter saw a turning of the page on recession fears, the potential for a financial crisis still looms. Major companies like Tesla, Meta, and Amazon are feeling the impact on the stock market, and the effects could ripple out to businesses of all sizes. The probability of a financial crisis is a complex issue, with many variables and uncertainties. Economists and financial analysts continue to monitor the situation closely, using their expertise to predict and hopefully prevent a major economic downturn. In the end, it's a delicate balancing act. Too much caution could stifle growth, while too little could lead to a crisis. As we navigate these uncertain times, one thing is clear: this vicious cycle could further deteriorate demand, leading to an economic downturn. There are 3 main scenarios that economists are considering regarding the crisis and inflation. The first scenario involves the Federal Reserve, the country's central banking system. In the face of an economic downturn, one of the key tools the Federal Reserve has at its disposal is the power to cut interest rates. Lower interest rates make borrowing cheaper, encouraging businesses to invest and consumers to spend, which could stimulate the economy and aid recovery. However, many economists consider this scenario unlikely. They argue that given the current low interest rates, the Federal Reserve does not have much room to cut further without entering negative territory, a move that could have unforeseen and potentially negative consequences. Moving to the second scenario, we find ourselves face to face with a term that sends shivers down the spines of economists: stagflation. Stagflation is the simultaneous occurrence of economic stagnation and persistent inflation. This is a particularly tricky situation to navigate. as traditional economic policy tools often exacerbate one problem while trying to solve the other. For example, measures to stimulate the economy and combat stagnation can lead to increased inflation, and vice versa. This scenario is viewed by many as the most dangerous and most likely, given the current economic indicators. Finally, let's turn to the third scenario, which involves higher inflation due to global production drops. In an increasingly interconnected world, a slowdown in production in one country can have ripple effects across the globe. If production drops significantly, this could lead to a decrease in supply of goods, which, coupled with steady or increasing demand, could drive up prices, leading to inflation. In response, the Federal Reserve may be forced to increase interest rates to keep inflation in check, but this could exacerbate the economic crisis by making borrowing more expensive. Each of these scenarios carries potential impacts that could ripple through the economy. A Federal Reserve interest rate cut could potentially stimulate the economy but may also lead to negative interest rates. Stagflation could lead to a prolonged period of economic hardship with no easy policy solutions. And higher inflation due to global production drops could result in a tightening of monetary policy at a time when the economy can least afford it. These scenarios are not predictions, they are possibilities based on current economic indicators and historical trends. They are tools for understanding potential futures so that we can better prepare for whatever comes our way. The most dangerous and likely scenario, according to experts, is stagflation, which combines economic decline with persistent inflation. This scenario presents a complex challenge for policymakers, as the tools to fight inflation and stimulate economic growth often work at cross purposes. But by understanding these potential outcomes, we can make more informed decisions about our economic future. The U.S. fiscal deficit and increasing government debt could exacerbate the crisis. This statement takes us deep into the core of our discussion for this scene. The fiscal deficit, simply put, is the result of government spending exceeding its income. This imbalance, when persistent, leads to an increase in government debt. Now, what does this mean for the economy? Well, as the deficit grows, the government is forced to borrow more. This borrowed money or debt accumulates over time, and just like any loan, it comes with interest. As the government debt increases, so does the interest that needs to be paid back. This is where things start to get tricky. Higher interest expenses mean that a larger portion of the government's budget is allocated to paying off this debt, leaving less room for investment in areas crucial for economic growth like infrastructure, education, and healthcare. This situation could potentially lead to a vicious cycle. As government investment decreases, economic growth slows down, leading to lower income, which in turn increases the fiscal deficit. Moreover, a large amount of government debt can also make the economy more vulnerable to external shocks. For instance, if interest rates rise globally, the cost to finance the debt increases, further straining the government budget. This is particularly concerning in the current context where the potential for a financial crisis remains. The relationship between the fiscal deficit, government debt, and the health of the economy is a complex one. The key takeaway here is that a high fiscal deficit and increasing government debt can deepen an economic crisis. They limit the government's ability to invest in the economy and increase vulnerability to external shocks. As we navigate these uncertain economic times, it's crucial to understand that the fiscal deficit and government debt are not just abstract concepts. They have real-world implications on our daily lives, affecting everything from the quality of public services to the stability of our jobs. The financial health of the nation is at risk if these issues are not addressed, and that's why it's crucial for us to be aware, informed, and prepared for what lies ahead. The U.S., as a major economic influencer, can impact or be impacted by global economic conditions. In our interconnected world, we can't ignore the economic ripples that spread from one country to another. Let's take a look at some of these global concerns that could potentially contribute to an economic downturn in the U.S. Firstly, the Chinese economy. China is a powerhouse in the global economic scene, and any instability there can have far-reaching effects. Recent concerns about the Chinese real estate market, for example, could have a ripple effect on the U.S. economy, given the interconnectedness of global finance and trade. Moving on to Europe, the crisis there is another potential trigger. The European Union, an economic giant, is grappling with sluggish economic growth, and this could have implications for the U.S. economy. If Europe's economy slows down, it could lead to decreased demand for U.S. exports, which could in turn lead to a slowdown in the U.S. Next, let's not forget about the Ukraine conflict. Geopolitical tensions can create uncertainty in the global economy, and the Ukraine conflict is no exception. This ongoing conflict could lead to increased volatility in the financial markets, which could indirectly impact the U.S. economy. So you see, the U.S. economy doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a vast, intricate web of global economic relationships. A slowdown in China, a crisis in Europe, or conflict in Ukraine could each send shockwaves that reach the U.S. shores. In the face of global economic challenges, it's more important than ever for the U.S. to build economic resilience. This means fostering an economy that's flexible, robust, and capable of adapting to change. In conclusion, we should remember that economic trends are complex and often unpredictable. They are influenced by a myriad of factors, including those beyond our borders. The world's economies are closely linked, and the U.S. is no exception. With the potential for an economic downturn on the horizon, it's important to be prepared. As we navigate the choppy waters of economic uncertainty, preparation becomes our best defense. Individuals and businesses alike can take proactive steps to brace for the potential downturn and ensure financial resilience. Let's start with individuals. It's crucial to build an emergency fund, a financial safety net that can cover 3 to 6 months of living expenses. This fund can be a lifesaver in times of job loss or reduced income. Reducing debt is another important step. High-interest debts, like credit card balances, can eat into your monthly budget, making it harder to weather financial storms. Next, consider diversifying your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. A mix of stocks, bonds, and other assets can help mitigate risks. And remember, investing isn't just about the stock market. Consider other avenues like real estate, precious metals, or even your own education and skills. Now, for businesses, it's essential to create a contingency plan. This includes identifying essential operations and ensuring they can continue even in a downturn. Businesses might also consider diversifying their customer base and exploring new markets to spread the risk. Another strategy is to maintain strong cash reserves. Just like an individual's emergency fund, a robust cash reserve can help a business navigate through tough times. It's also vital to keep a close eye on the market trends and adjust your business strategy accordingly. Cost management is key. Look for ways to reduce operating costs without sacrificing the quality of your products or services. This could involve renegotiating contracts, optimizing energy use, or even reassessing your business model. And finally, both individuals and businesses should stay informed. Keep tabs on the economic indicators, follow the news, and seek advice from financial experts. Knowledge is power, and in an economic downturn, it can be your lifeline. In uncertain times, preparedness is key to weathering the storm. So, what is the most likely economic scenario? We've discussed the complex economic landscape that lies ahead for the United States. The first half of this year saw a decline, but we've managed to sidestep an official recession. However, the potential for a financial crisis is still very much alive, especially considering the significant impacts on major companies like Tesla, Meta, and Amazon. Economists and financial analysts have projected varying probabilities of a financial crisis, each focusing on the nature of the crisis and the behavior of inflation. We've talked about the vicious cycle of decreased consumer demand that's expected to trigger an economic downturn, leading businesses to cut investments and lay off employees, which in turn further deteriorates demand. We've outlined 3 main scenarios: the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates to aid recovery, an unlikely scenario according to many; stagflation, combining economic decline with persistent inflation, viewed as the most dangerous and likely scenario; and higher inflation due to global production drops, which would force the Federal Reserve to increase interest rates, potentially exacerbating the crisis. We've also touched on the U.S. fiscal deficit and increasing government debt, which could imply higher interest expenses and less investment, potentially deepening the crisis if government spending exceeds income. The role of the U.S. as a major economic influencer, capable of impacting or being impacted by global economic conditions, has been discussed, with current concerns about the Chinese economy, the crisis in Europe, and the Ukraine conflict. Now, as we reach the end of our discussion, it's time to hear from you. What do you think is the most likely economic scenario? How do you perceive the potential impacts of an economic downturn? Your perspectives and opinions are invaluable as we navigate these uncertain times. The question remains, where will the roots of the next crisis lie? Share your thoughts and let's navigate these uncertain waters together.